Security, remove him now. The words didn't echo, they landed, sharp and deliberate, slicing clean through the polished quiet of the hotel lobby at exactly 10:42 a.m. The marble floors, the glass chandeliers, the low hum of rolling suitcases, everything seemed to pause, like the building itself was holding its breath. Darius Cole didn't move. Not when the manager said it. Not when two uniformed security staff shifted their weight near the entrance, waiting for a signal that hadn't come yet. He stood there in a fitted charcoal t-shirt, dark jeans, and worn leather sneakers, nothing that suggested ownership, nothing that screamed power. And that was the point. He had walked into his own hotel like this on purpose. No assistant. No black car. No name announced at the door. Just him. Because for the past 6 months, emails had been stacking up, complaints, reviews, quiet accusations buried under corporate replies. Patterns he couldn't ignore anymore. Patterns that all sounded the same. Didn't feel welcome. Was treated differently. They looked at me like I didn't belong. And now here he was, standing in the center of it. Living it. The manager, a tall white man in a navy suit with a name tag that read, Gregory Vance, stepped forward, his expression tight, voice controlled but loud enough for the room to hear. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time, leave the premises. This area is for registered guests." A few heads turned. A couple near the check-in desk stopped mid-conversation. A woman by the elevators lowered her phone slightly, watching. Darius's eyes moved slowly across the room, taking it in. Not reacting. Not yet. "I am a registered guest," he said, calm, measured, like he'd said it 100 times before. Gregory gave a thin smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "We checked. There's no reservation under your name." He didn't ask for ID. Didn't ask for confirmation. Just dismissed it. Like the answer had already been decided before the question was even asked. At the front desk, a younger employee glanced at the screen, hesitated, then looked back down, fingers hovering over the keyboard but not moving. No one spoke. No one corrected him. The silence wasn't neutral. It leaned. Darius noticed that. He always noticed that. From the corner of his eye, he saw a man in a tailored suit step up beside Gregory, whisper something quick, subtle. Gregory nodded once, then turned back, louder this time. "We've had incidents like this before," he said. "People trying to access restricted areas without proper credentials." The word "people" hung in the air longer than it should have. Darius exhaled slowly. Not frustration. Not fear. Just recognition. He'd heard it before. In boardrooms. In lobbies. In places that smiled until they didn't. A woman near the concierge desk shifted uncomfortably, her gaze flicking between Darius and the manager. Another guest pulled out their phone, not recording, just holding it, unsure. The tension wasn't loud. It was tight. Controlled. Like something was about to snap but hadn't yet decided how. "Run the name again," Darius said quietly. Gregory didn't move. "Sir, you're making a scene." "No," Darius replied, his voice still even, still steady. "You already did that." And for a moment, just a moment, the room felt different. Not resolved. Not safe. Just aware. Like the truth had stepped into the space, uninvited, and refused to leave. Gregory Vance let out a short breath through his nose, the kind that carried more irritation than patience, and adjusted his cuff as if resetting control over a situation that had already begun slipping through his fingers, his eyes scanning Darius again from head to toe, not with curiosity but with quiet dismissal, measuring him against an unspoken standard that had nothing to do with reservations or policy. "You need to understand something," he said, lowering his voice just enough to sound reasonable but keeping it loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "This property maintains a certain level of clientele, and we cannot just allow anyone to walk in and claim access to premium spaces." The words were polished, but the meaning underneath them was not subtle. A couple standing 10 feet away exchanged a glance, the man shifting his weight as if deciding whether to stay out of it or not. While at the front desk the younger employee finally tapped the keyboard, hesitated again, then stopped entirely when Gregory's reflection appeared in the monitor. Watching, Darius noticed everything: the pause, the pressure, the quiet compliance. The system was not loud, it did not need to be, it functioned in glances and silences and decisions made before facts were ever confirmed. "What name did you check?" Darius asked, still calm, still centered. Gregory tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk forming. "The one you gave," he replied, "and it does not exist in our system." That was not entirely true, and the room felt it even if no one said it, because the employee behind the desk had already seen something on the screen, something that made her fingers hover instead of type, but she said nothing. The silence thickened, not empty but loaded, like a question no one wanted to answer out loud. From the far side of the lobby a woman in a cream blazer slowly raised her phone, not directly pointing it yet but ready. Instinctively sensing that whatever was happening was not just a misunderstanding, it was a pattern unfolding in real time, Darius shifted his stance slightly, not defensive, not aggressive, just grounded, like someone who had already decided he was not leaving. "Then check again," he said, not louder, not sharper, just certain. Gregory's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The kind of reaction that came when authority was questioned in front of witnesses. "Sir, I am not going to repeat myself," he replied. "You are not listed as a guest, and at this point you are delaying service for actual paying customers." The emphasis on actual did not go unnoticed. A man near the concierge desk frowned slightly, glancing at Darius and then back at Gregory, something about the situation no longer aligning with what he expected from a place like this. Darius took a slow breath, his eyes drifting for a split second toward the glass doors behind him, sunlight cutting through the lobby in clean, sharp lines, and for just a moment his mind flickered, not away from the present but deeper into it, into memory, into a version of himself years earlier standing outside another hotel, different city, same tone, same look. "We do not have anything available," they had told him back then, even as he watched other guests walk in without question. That memory did not sting anymore, it anchored him, reminded him exactly why he built what he built, why he owned what he owned, and why moments like this were never accidents, they were systems repeating themselves. Gregory took a step closer now, closing the distance not physically but symbolically, trying to reassert control. "If you do not leave voluntarily, we will have to escalate this," he said, and with that word escalate, something shifted in the room. The woman with the phone finally lifted it fully, another guest leaned slightly to get a clearer view, and the employee at the desk swallowed hard, her eyes flicking between the screen and Darius as if she knew something the room did not yet. And in the middle of it all, Darius Cole remained exactly where he was, unmoved, unshaken, his voice quiet but carrying further than anyone expected when he said, "Then escalate it." The word escalate did not hang in the air for long before it began to take shape, Gregory's expression tightening as if the situation had crossed an invisible line he could no longer ignore. He turned slightly and gave a small nod toward the security staff by the entrance, a silent instruction that did not need to be spoken out loud. They stepped forward, not aggressively, not hurried, but with the quiet authority of people used to being the final step in a conversation that had already been decided. The movement alone shifted the energy in the lobby, a ripple passing through the small cluster of guests who were now fully watching, no longer pretending to be distracted. The woman in the cream blazer raised her phone higher this time, her thumb hovering near the screen as if deciding whether to press record. A man near the elevators crossed his arms, his gaze narrowing, something about the scene no longer aligning with the polished image the hotel projected. At the front desk the young employee finally spoke, her voice hesitant but audible. "Sir, I think there might be." She stopped mid-sentence when Gregory's eyes snapped toward her. The look was not loud but it was enough to silence her, enough to remind her where she stood in the structure of this place. She lowered her gaze immediately, fingers retreating from the keyboard, the system closing ranks without a word. Darius noticed that too, the interruption, the shutdown, the way truth almost surfaced and was pushed back down before it could breathe. He did not look at her, did not call her out, he simply let the moment settle into the room where everyone could feel it. One of the security staff, a tall man with a calm but firm presence, stepped within a few feet of Darius, not touching him, not crowding him, just close enough to make the expectation clear. "Sir, we are going to need you to step outside with us." His tone was professional, measured, the kind of voice trained to de-escalate while still enforcing direction. Darius turned his head slightly, meeting his eyes, not with defiance, not with anger, but with something steadier, something that did not match the role they had already assigned to him. "On what grounds?" he asked. "Simple, direct," Gregory answered before the security staff could, stepping back into the center of the moment, reclaiming control of the narrative. "Trespassing," he said, the word landing heavier than the others, "legal, official, designed to justify everything that came after it." A murmur moved through the small crowd, not loud, but enough to signal that the line had shifted. This was no longer just about a reservation, it was about authority being enforced without verification. The man near the concierge desk shook his head slightly, almost to himself, while the woman with the phone finally pressed record, the small red indicator glowing. Like a quiet witness, Darius let a brief silence pass, not rushed, not pressured, his posture unchanged, his hands relaxed at his sides, as if he had already anticipated this exact word, this exact moment. "You are calling me a trespasser," he said slowly, repeating it not as a question but as a statement, letting it settle into the space. Gregory did not hesitate. "That is correct," he replied. And in that instant the tension sharpened, not louder, but clearer, the lines fully drawn. The young employee at the desk looked up again, her eyes flicking to Darius, then back to the screen, then to Gregory, conflict written across her face, but still she said nothing, still the system held. Darius reached into his pocket, not quickly, not dramatically, just a simple movement, and pulled out his phone, the gesture small but significant. Gregory's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "If you are calling someone to verify your story, it will not change the outcome," he said, already dismissing it before it happened. But Darius did not respond to that. He looked down at the screen for a moment, his thumb moving with calm precision, then lifted the phone to his ear, the room quieting almost instinctively, every small movement now carrying weight. "Yes," he said when the line connected, his voice even, controlled. "It is happening right now." He paused, listening, his eyes lifting slowly to meet Gregory's again. "Go ahead and initiate it." Another pause, shorter this time, sharper, full protocol. He ended the call without another word, slipping the phone back into his pocket as if nothing had changed, but everything had, because the confidence in his tone did not match the role they had assigned him, and for the first time since this began, uncertainty flickered not in the crowd, not in the staff, but in Gregory himself, just for a second, just long enough for the room to feel it. The call ended but its impact did not. It lingered in the air like a shift no one could quite name yet. Gregory Vance straightened his posture again, forcing composure back into his shoulders as if the brief flicker of uncertainty had never existed. He let out a quiet breath and gave a small dismissive chuckle that sounded more for the room than for himself. "Full protocol," he repeated under his breath with a hint of sarcasm. Then louder, "Sir, whatever you think you just did, it does not change the fact that you are being asked to leave." His tone sharpened now, less polished, more urgent beneath the surface, as if the situation was no longer unfolding on his terms. The security staff remained where they were, waiting, watching, their stance unchanged but their eyes now moving between Gregory and Darius with more attention than before, because something about that call had not sounded like a bluff, it had sounded like instruction. Across the lobby the woman recording shifted slightly to get a clearer angle, her voice low as she whispered to herself, "This is not normal." The man near the elevators stepped closer now, no longer pretending to be uninvolved, while at the front desk the young employee could not stop herself this time. She glanced down at the screen again, her fingers moving quickly, almost instinctively, and this time she spoke before she could stop herself. "There is a reservation," she said, her voice trembling just enough to be real. "It is under Cole. Darius Cole." The name landed in the room like a key turning in a lock, subtle but undeniable. Gregory froze for half a second, just enough for those watching to notice, then he turned sharply toward her, his voice low and controlled but carrying an edge that had not been there before. "Cancel it," he said, not loud, not shouted, but final. The employee blinked, her hands hovering over the keyboard again. "Sir, it is marked as executive level," she added, quieter now, as if the words themselves carried weight she did not fully understand. Gregory's jaw tightened. then it was entered incorrectly, he replied immediately, cutting off any room for interpretation, cancel it and note it as invalid. The words came faster now, more forceful, the system adjusting in real time to maintain the narrative that had already been set. A murmur spread through the guests, louder this time, because now there was a contradiction, now there was proof that something did not align. The man who had been watching from the concierge desk stepped forward slightly, his voice measured but clear. You just said there was no reservation, he pointed out, not confrontational, just factual. Gregory turned toward him with a tight smile, and there is not, he replied, doubling down, reinforcing the version of reality he needed the room to accept, but the certainty in his tone no longer carried the same weight it had minutes ago, because the room had heard the name, the room had seen the hesitation, and the room was no longer neutral. Darius stood in the center of it all, unchanged, his expression calm, his posture steady, as if every word being spoken was simply confirming something he already knew. He looked toward the employee briefly, not with pressure, not with expectation, just acknowledgement, then back to Gregory. You are editing your system in real time, he said quietly, the statement cutting through the noise without needing volume. Gregory let out a short laugh, but it sounded thinner now, less convincing. You are mistaken, he replied quickly, but before he could continue, a soft chime echoed from the front desk terminal, a sound small enough to be ignored under normal circumstances, but in this moment it pulled every eye in the room toward the screen. The employee's face changed instantly, confusion first, then something closer to realization. She leaned in slightly, reading, then looked up at Gregory, her voice no longer hesitant, just stunned. The system just locked, she said, and for the first time since this began, Gregory did not have an immediate response, because whatever Darius had set in motion had just reached the building itself, and the building had answered. The word locked did not just describe the system, it described the room. Every movement slowed, every breath measured, as if the invisible structure that had been holding Gregory's authority in place had suddenly shifted beneath him. He stared at the screen for a moment longer than he should have, then stepped forward quickly, leaning over the desk with forced urgency. Refresh it, he said, his voice tight, controlled, but no longer calm. The young employee shook her head almost immediately, her eyes scanning the interface. I cannot, it is not responding to manual input, she replied, her tone no longer hesitant but edged with something closer to alarm. The terminal displayed a clean interface but none of the usual commands were active, every function grayed out except one small notification blinking at the top right corner, a message that had not been there seconds ago. Gregory followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing as he read silently. Whatever was written there did not reassure him, because his posture changed, subtly but clearly, his shoulders no longer squared, his stance no longer rooted in control. Across the lobby the murmurs grew louder, no longer whispers but conversations, people comparing what they had just seen, what they had just heard, the contradiction, the hesitation, the system itself now refusing to cooperate with the version of reality that had been imposed on it. The woman recording took a step closer, her voice now audible as she spoke into her phone. They said he did not have a reservation, but the system says otherwise. The man near the elevators nodded, folding his arms tighter, his attention fixed on Gregory, waiting, watching, as if expecting the next move to reveal everything. Darius remained still, his presence no longer just part of the scene but the center of it, not because he demanded attention, but because everything now seemed to orbit around the decision he had already made. He glanced briefly at the front desk, then back at Gregory, his voice quiet but cutting through the rising noise. You should read it out loud, he said, not as a challenge, but as an invitation. Gregory did not respond immediately, his jaw tightening again as his eyes flicked between the screen and the growing number of witnesses around him. The pressure was no longer internal, it was visible, shared, undeniable. The employee hesitated, then looked at Gregory as if asking for permission without speaking. When none came, she swallowed and read it herself, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. System override initiated, executive access confirmed, audit protocol active. Each word landed with precision, stripping away the uncertainty piece by piece. The room reacted in real time, a ripple of realization moving through the guests. The language was not ambiguous. It was not open to interpretation, it was clear, official, final. Gregory straightened abruptly, his voice rising slightly as he tried to regain control. That does not mean anything, he said quickly, too quickly, it could be a technical error, but even as he said it, the confidence was gone, replaced by something thinner, something reactive. The system chimed again, this time louder, more deliberate, and a second message appeared beneath the first. The employee read it without being asked. Her voice now carrying across the entire lobby, access hierarchy verified, ownership. Credentials recognized. The word ownership did not echo, it settled, heavy and undeniable, and in that moment the entire dynamic of the room shifted, not suddenly, not dramatically, but completely. The people who had been watching leaned in, the ones who had been silent began to speak, and Gregory Vance, who minutes ago controlled the narrative without question, now stood at the center of a system that had just identified exactly who Darius Cole was, whether he was ready to accept it or not. The word ownership did not just change the room, it rewrote it. The quiet authority that had once belonged to Gregory dissolved in real time, replaced by something far less stable, far more exposed. He blinked once as if recalibrating, then forced a laugh that landed flat against the marble and glass. That does not prove anything, he said, but the sentence did not travel the way it had before, it fell short. Intercepted by the weight of what had already been said, the system had not hesitated. It had not asked for confirmation, it had recognized, and now everyone else was catching up. The man near the elevator stepped forward another pace, no longer a passive observer, his voice calm but direct. You called him a trespasser, he said, not raising his tone, just stating it. Gregory opened his mouth, then closed it again, his eyes flicking toward the front desk, toward the screen, toward the people watching, calculating, searching for a version of control that no longer existed. The young employee straightened slightly, her posture changing as if the system itself had given her permission to stand differently, to speak differently. She looked at Gregory, then at Darius, then back at the screen. There is more, she said quietly, and without waiting for approval she read again, her voice steady. Audit protocol logging active. All interactions within this location are now being recorded and transmitted to corporate oversight. The word corporate landed harder than the others, because it meant this was no longer contained, no longer manageable within the walls of the lobby. It meant accountability had entered the room without asking for permission. A ripple moved through the guests again, stronger this time, clearer. The woman recording lowered her phone just enough to look directly at Gregory, her expression no longer uncertain but resolved. The narrative had shifted and she knew it. Everyone did. The security staff exchanged a brief glance, subtle but meaningful, their stance loosening just slightly. The certainty that had guided them moments ago now replaced by caution, because the person they had been instructed to remove was no longer just a guest, not even just a VIP, but something far beyond the scope of their authority. Darius finally took a small step forward, not closing distance, not asserting dominance, just enough to recenter himself in the space that had always been his. His voice remained low, controlled, but now it carried a different weight, not defensive, not explanatory, simply factual. You did not ask who I was, he said, his eyes steady on Gregory. You decided. The words were not loud, but they spread through the room like a current, connecting every moment that had led to this one. The hesitation at the desk, the dismissal, the label, the escalation. Gregory shook his head quickly, as if rejecting the framing. We followed protocol, he replied, but even as he said it, the phrase sounded hollow, exposed, because the system itself had just activated a different protocol, one that did not align with his version of events. Darius held his gaze, unblinking. No, he said quietly, you followed assumption, and that word landed deeper than any accusation, because it did not just describe what had happened, it explained it. The room fell into a tighter silence, not empty, but focused, every person present now fully aware that they were witnessing something larger than a disagreement, something structural, something that had just been pulled into the light. And in that moment Gregory Vance, who had once controlled the outcome with a single sentence, now stood inside a system that was no longer listening to him, but recording him. Gregory's mouth opened again, but no immediate words came out this time. The space that once belonged to his authority now filled with something far heavier, something watching him, measuring him, holding him in place. He shifted his weight slightly, glancing toward the security staff as if expecting them to step back into the role he had assigned them earlier, but they did not move, not this time. Their posture had changed, subtle but unmistakable, no longer advancing, no longer enforcing, just observing, recalibrating in real time as the hierarchy around them redefined itself. the man who had first spoken near the elevators took another step forward, now fully part of the moment, his voice steady, not aggressive, just clear. "You escalated this without verifying anything," he said, and there was no pushback from the room, no resistance, just quiet agreement settling into place. The woman who had been recording lowered her phone for a second, her eyes fixed on Gregory with a look that no longer questioned what was happening but recognized it. The narrative had shifted and it was not shifting back. At the front desk the employee continued to read the screen silently, her eyes moving faster now as new lines populated in real time. She hesitated once, then spoke again, her voice carrying across the lobby without being asked. "It is pulling prior incident reports," she said. And that sentence landed differently than the others, because it did not just explain the present, it reached backward, connecting this moment to others, unseen but now undeniable. Gregory turned sharply toward her. "That is internal," he snapped, the first crack in his tone no longer hidden, but it was too late, the room had already heard it, the idea that this was not isolated, that it was part of something larger, something repeatable, something documented. The employee swallowed, but did not stop. Multiple entries flagged under guest dispute, access denial, verification bypass, she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, as if the system itself was speaking through her now, and the silence that followed was not confusion, it was recognition. Darius stood at the center of it, not reacting to the words, not surprised by them, just present, his eyes steady, his posture unchanged, like someone who had expected exactly this to surface once the right switch was flipped. He took another small step forward, not toward Gregory, but into the space that had opened between them, the invisible line now clearly redrawn. "You said this was protocol," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension without needing force. Gregory did not respond immediately, his gaze shifting again, searching for something that was no longer there. Control, certainty, alignment, all of it had fractured under the weight of what was now visible. Darius continued, his tone unchanged, "Then explain why your protocol keeps producing the same result." The question did not demand an answer, it exposed the absence of one. The man near the concierge desk nodded slowly, almost to himself, while another guest stepped closer. No longer content to watch from a distance, the room was no longer divided between staff and guests, it was divided between what had been claimed and what had been revealed. Gregory inhaled sharply, trying once more to regain footing. "This is being taken out of context," he said, but even he could hear it, the weakness in the statement, the lack of structure behind it, because the context was right there, on the screen, in the voices, in the pattern unfolding in front of everyone. And then the system chimed again, louder this time, more deliberate, drawing every eye back to the terminal as a new line appeared, one that carried a different kind of finality. The employee read it slowly, each word landing with precision. "Executive directive incoming. Stand by for immediate compliance," and in that moment the room did not just feel the shift, it anticipated it. Because whatever came next was no longer controlled by Gregory Vance, it was coming from above him, beyond him, and it was already on its way. The word "stand by for immediate compliance" did not just signal an incoming action, they created a pause so complete it felt engineered, the kind of silence that does not come from confusion but from anticipation. Every person in the lobby felt it, the air tightening not with fear but with expectation, as if something long buried beneath polished floors and scripted greetings was finally about to surface. Darius did not move, not outwardly, but something in his stillness deepened, his gaze drifting for a brief second past Gregory, past the front desk, past the glass doors where sunlight stretched across the marble in clean lines, and for that moment the present loosened its grip just enough for memory to slip through, not as a distraction but as context. He was 23 again, standing in a different lobby, smaller, older, less polished but carrying the same tone, the same quiet judgment wrapped in polite language. He remembered the clerk behind the desk not looking at his face but at his clothes, then at the line behind him, then back at the computer, typing something that never seemed to resolve. "We are fully booked," she had said, even as he watched a man walk in behind him and receive a key within seconds, no questions asked, no hesitation. He remembered standing there for a moment longer than necessary, not arguing, not pushing, just absorbing it, understanding it, filing it away not as a single moment but as a pattern, one that would repeat in airports, in offices, in spaces that claimed neutrality but operated on something else entirely. that night he slept in his car 3 blocks away, not because he had no options, but because he needed to remember exactly how it felt, the weight of being dismissed without being known. The quiet erasure that left no mark on the system but carved something permanent into him, that was. The night the idea stopped being abstract and became a direction, the night he decided that if doors were going to close like that, he would build ones that did not just for himself, but for every version of himself that had stood in spaces like this and been told, without words, that they did not belong. The memory did not bring anger, it brought clarity, and that clarity settled back into the present as his eyes returned to Gregory, who now stood in the same position that Clerk once had. Different uniform, different building, same assumption, the system chimed again, pulling everyone fully back into the moment. The employee at the desk straightened instinctively, her hands no longer hovering but resting firmly on the counter as if she understood that whatever came next required attention, not hesitation. A new message expanded across the screen, larger than the others, impossible to ignore. She read it slowly, each word deliberate. Executive directive confirmed, regional oversight engaged, live review initiated. The phrases stacked on each other, building weight, building consequence. The room reacted in quiet waves. A man near the elevators exhaled slowly, the woman with the phone adjusted her grip. Her eyes locked on Gregory as if waiting for him to respond, but he did not immediately, because for the first time he was not ahead of the situation, he was inside it, and it was moving faster than he could control. Darius took one measured step forward, not to confront, not to close distance, but to stand fully in the space that had always been his voice calm, steady, carrying just enough to reach every corner of the room. You see it now, he said, not as a question, not as a statement of victory, but as acknowledgement. Gregory's lips parted slightly, but no words followed, because whatever explanation he might have offered had already been overtaken by something larger, something documented, something that did not rely on his version of events. And as the system continued to process, to log, to reveal, the truth of the moment was no longer something that could be denied, only something that could be witnessed. The acknowledgement did not require confirmation, it had already settled into the room, visible in the way people stood, in the way they looked at Gregory now, not with deference but with expectation, waiting to see what he would do when the structure he relied on no longer held him up. He shifted again, a small movement that spoke louder than anything he had said, his hands briefly adjusting his jacket as if restoring control through habit, but the gesture did not land the same way anymore. Because control had already moved somewhere else. The system chimed once more, sharper this time, and the front desk terminal illuminated with a new sequence of information. The employee leaned forward, her focus complete, no hesitation left in her posture. She read carefully, her voice carrying with a clarity that cut through the tension. Live review connected, executive board notified, compliance officers joining session. The words did not just describe oversight, they introduced it, made it present, made it immediate. The room reacted with a collective stillness, not shock, not surprise, but recognition that this moment was no longer contained within the walls they stood in. It had expanded, multiplied, extended beyond them into something formal, something structured, something that would not disappear once the conversation ended. Gregory's eyes flicked toward the ceiling as if expecting cameras to appear, then back to the screen, then finally to Darius, searching, recalculating. But the imbalance remained, because Darius was no longer responding to him, he was standing within a system that was now responding on his behalf. The security staff took a subtle step back, not retreating, but repositioning, their role shifting from enforcement to observation. The man who had questioned earlier nodded once, quietly, as if a conclusion had been reached without needing to be spoken. Darius took another slow breath, then spoke, his voice calm, measured, but carrying a precision that aligned perfectly with what the system had just revealed. You escalated this based on assumption, he said, not looking away, not raising his tone, and now the system is doing what you chose not to do. The statement did not accuse, it clarified, it drew a straight line from decision to consequence. Gregory tried to respond, his lips parting, but the words came slower now, heavier. This is being reviewed out of context, he said, but the sentence lacked structure, lacked certainty, because context had already been established, documented, logged in real time. The employee glanced back at the screen, then at Gregory, then at Darius, her voice softer this time but more grounded. it is pulling audio from this interaction, she said, and that detail shifted everything again, because now it was not just what had been done, it was what had been said, preserved, replayable, undeniable. The woman recording lowered her phone slightly, her expression changing from anticipation to something closer to understanding, as if she realized that her recording was no longer the only one capturing this moment. The system itself had become the witness. The man near the elevators exhaled slowly, shaking his head once, not in disbelief but in recognition. The pattern had been exposed and it was no longer abstract. Darius stepped forward just enough to align himself with the center of the space, his presence now fully acknowledged, not questioned, not challenged. His voice steady as he spoke again. "You said I did not belong here." He paused, letting the word settle, not for emphasis but for clarity, "and you said it without knowing who you were speaking to." Gregory's shoulders dropped slightly, the tension no longer held up by certainty. The room quieted again, not because nothing was happening, but because everything was, and in that silence the distance between what had been assumed and what was now known became impossible to ignore, because the system had not just confirmed identity, it had confirmed truth, and it was still speaking. The silence that followed his words was no longer uncertain, it was heavy with recognition, the kind that does not need to be explained because it has already settled into every corner of the room. Gregory stood there, no longer directing the moment but reacting to it, his gaze shifting between Darius and the terminal as if searching for something that could restore the balance that had already been broken, but nothing came, because the system was still active, still processing, still revealing. The front desk screen updated again, a new layer unfolding without pause. The employee leaned in, her voice steady now, no hesitation left. "Executive identity verified, primary ownership confirmed, authorization level highest tier." Each phrase landed like a final piece clicking into place, leaving no room for interpretation. The room did not react with noise, it reacted with stillness, a deeper kind, one that replaced doubt with clarity. The woman who had been recording slowly lowered her phone, not because the moment had lost value, but because it had become undeniable, something no longer needing proof. The man near the elevators let out a quiet breath, shaking his head once as if acknowledging what had been right in front of them all along. The security staff stepped back another inch, subtle but definitive, their role now completely shifted, no longer enforcers, no longer participants, just witnesses to a structure correcting itself. Gregory swallowed, the movement small but visible, his voice finally returning, though it no longer carried authority, only reaction. "If this is some kind of misunderstanding, we can resolve it privately," he said, the tone softer now, controlled in a different way, no longer commanding but negotiating. The shift did not go unnoticed, it could not, because minutes ago he had been certain, and now he was careful. Darius looked at him for a moment, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a calm that came from knowing the moment had already moved beyond personal resolution. His voice when he spoke was quiet, but it carried further than anything else in the room. "You already made it public," he said, and the truth in that sentence settled deeper than anything before it, because it connected everything, the words spoken, the actions taken, the witnesses present, the system recording, all of it already outside the boundaries Gregory was trying to redraw. The terminal chimed again. Sharper, more final, and a new directive appeared. The employee read it slowly, each word deliberate. "Immediate administrative action authorized, local management access suspended pending review." Gregory's eyes widened slightly, the meaning clear even before it was spoken aloud. His access, his authority, his position within the system itself now under question, not by the room, but by something far above it. The shift was complete, the structure had turned inward, evaluating its own foundation. Darius took one final step forward, not closing distance, not asserting dominance, just aligning himself with the truth that had now been fully revealed. His gaze steady, his voice measured. "You removed me from a place I built," he said, the words simple, but carrying the full weight of everything that had just unfolded, "and you did it without asking a single question." Gregory did not respond this time, because there was nothing left to say that could undo what had already been seen, already been recorded, already been confirmed. The room held its silence, not waiting anymore, but witnessing, as the system continued to move, not with emotion, not with hesitation, but with precision. And in that moment the power in the room no longer belonged to assumption, it belonged to truth. The room did not erupt, it shifted, slowly but completely, like something heavy settling into its final position. the kind of change that does not need noise to be felt. Gregory stood there, no longer trying to command attention, no longer trying to redirect the moment, because the system had already taken over that role. The front desk terminal pulsed once more, not as a warning but as confirmation. The employee leaned forward again, her voice steady, no hesitation left. Access credentials revoked, managerial authority suspended, awaiting final disposition. The words did not just describe a process, they finalized it, and for the first time Gregory's posture visibly collapsed, not dramatically, not outwardly, but in the small details, the way his shoulders dropped, the way his hands no longer found purpose, the way his gaze lowered for just a second before lifting again, searching for something that was no longer there. The authority he had relied on had not just been questioned, it had been removed, and the room felt it. The man near the elevator stepped back slightly, not out of discomfort but out of recognition that the moment had crossed into something definitive. The woman who had been recording raised her phone again, not to capture conflict but to capture resolution, because what was unfolding now was not chaos, it was consequence. The security staff stood still, their presence unchanged but their role entirely different, no longer aligned with Gregory, no longer acting on his direction. They were now aligned with the system itself, waiting for instruction from above rather than below. Darius remained where he was, his posture unchanged, his expression calm, but now there was something else in the way he stood, not dominance, not triumph, but clarity, the kind that comes when everything that needed to surface has already done so. He looked at Gregory for a moment, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with a steady gaze that held no urgency, only truth. "This was not a mistake," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the space without force. Gregory looked up, his eyes meeting Darius's, and for the first time there was no resistance in them, no attempt to reframe, no attempt to regain control, just a quiet understanding of what had happened, and what it meant. The system chimed again, and the employee read the final directive, her voice clear, unwavering: immediate termination authorized, all access permanently revoked, compliance team en route. The finality in those words did not need explanation, it carried its own weight, its own consequence. The room did not react with shock, it reacted with acceptance, because everything that led to this had already been seen, already been understood. The pattern had been exposed, the system had responded, and now the outcome was simply the result of that process. Gregory exhaled slowly, the sound quiet but heavy, as if releasing something he had been holding on to without realizing it. He did not speak, because there was nothing left to say that could alter what had already been decided. Darius took a small step forward, not to close distance, not to assert anything further, just to stand fully in the space that had always been his voice steady, measured, carrying just enough to reach everyone present. "You did not fail me," he said, the words landing with precision. "You exposed yourself," and that sentence settled into the room like a final statement, not directed at Gregory alone, but at everything that had been revealed, everything that had been recorded, everything that had now been brought into the open. The system did not respond, it did not need to, because it had already done its part, and in that moment the power in the room no longer belonged to position, or assumption, or appearance, it belonged to truth, fully seen, fully acknowledged, and impossible to ignore. The final directive did not echo, it settled, quiet and absolute, like a door closing that would not open again, and for a moment no one moved, not because they were unsure, but because they understood exactly what had just happened. The system had not hesitated, it had not negotiated, it had acted, and now the space that once revolved around Gregory stood still without him at its center. He remained where he was, no longer positioned as authority, no longer holding the structure together, just another figure in a room that had already moved past him. His eyes drifted briefly toward the front desk, toward the terminal that had rewritten everything in less than a minute, then back to Darius. But there was no challenge left in that gaze, only a quiet recognition that the outcome had never truly been his to control. The employee behind the desk stepped back slightly, not out of fear, but out of adjustment, her posture aligning with the shift that had already taken place, her voice softer now but clear. "Compliance team has checked in at the entrance," she said, and even that sentence carried a different weight, because it was no longer about escalation, it was about completion. The process that had begun with a single assumption now reaching its full conclusion. The security staff glanced toward the doors instinctively, then back to Darius, waiting, not for Gregory, not for instruction from below, but for confirmation from the presence that had been validated beyond question. The lobby itself felt different now, not quieter, but clearer. The tension that had once been sharp and uncertain now replaced with something steadier, something resolved. Guests who had been watching began to shift their stance, not leaving, not disengaging, but repositioning themselves within a moment. They now understood. The woman who had been recording lowered her phone completely, her expression thoughtful, as if what she had witnessed had moved beyond content into something more lasting. The man near the elevators gave a small nod, not to anyone in particular, but to the truth that had revealed itself in front of him. Darius stood still, his presence unchanged, his expression composed, but now there was a quiet finality in the way he held the space, not claiming it, not asserting it, simply existing within it as it had always belonged to him. He looked around the lobby once, not scanning for approval, not measuring reactions, just acknowledging the room that had just shown him exactly what he needed to see. His voice when he spoke again was calm, even, carrying without effort. This place was built on standards, he said, each word deliberate, but standards only matter when they are applied without bias. The sentence did not accuse, it defined, it reframed the entire moment not as an incident, but as a principle, something larger than the individuals involved. The employee at the desk nodded almost instinctively, as if the statement aligned with something she had felt but never said. The system remained active, its screen steady now, no longer updating, no longer revealing, because everything that needed to surface already had. And as the doors at the entrance opened quietly to allow the compliance team inside, their presence calm, professional, measured, the final step in a process that had already reached its conclusion, the room did not react with tension, it responded with acceptance, because what was happening now was not conflict. It was resolution, and at the center of it all, Darius Cole stood not as someone who had taken control, but as someone who had simply allowed the truth to do it for him. The compliance team entered without urgency, without raised voices, just quiet authority shaped by process rather than perception. Their presence did not disrupt the room, it completed it. Two individuals in neutral suits approached the front desk, exchanging brief nods with the employee who had already stepped aside, her role no longer uncertain, no longer conflicted, but aligned with what had been revealed. One of them spoke softly to her, confirming identification, confirming system logs, confirming what had already been made undeniable, while the other turned slightly toward Gregory, not confrontational, not accusatory, just direct, as if the outcome had already been written and they were simply reading it aloud in real time. Gregory did not resist, did not argue, because there was nothing left to argue against. The system had spoken before he could, and now it had acted beyond him. He stood there for a moment longer, then stepped back, not escorted, not forced, just repositioned by the weight of consequence, the kind that does not require pressure to be felt. The guests watched, not with curiosity anymore, but with understanding, because what had unfolded was no longer a question of what happened, it was a clear demonstration of why it happened. The woman who had been recording lowered her phone completely, her expression thoughtful, almost reflective, as if she understood that what she had witnessed was not just an isolated incident but a pattern interrupted. The man near the elevators gave a small nod again, this time more certain, more resolved, as if something had been confirmed for him personally, something he had seen before but never fully acknowledged until now. The security staff remained still, their presence steady, but their role complete, no longer needed to enforce anything, because the system had already done what enforcement could not. Darius stood at the center of it all, unchanged, unshaken, his posture calm, his presence grounded, not elevated by the moment but clarified by it. He looked around the lobby one final time, not searching for reaction, not measuring impact, just acknowledging the space that had revealed itself in full. His voice when he spoke carried no edge, no tension, only truth. This was never about access, he said, each word deliberate, steady. It was about assumption. The sentence moved through the room like a final alignment, connecting every moment, every decision, every word that had led to this outcome. He paused briefly, not for effect, but because there was nothing rushed about what came next. An assumption, he continued, his gaze steady, is what breaks systems when it goes unchecked. The words did not accuse, they defined. They reframed everything that had just happened into something larger than a single person. Larger than a single moment. The compliance team finished their process quietly, one of them nodding toward Darius with professional acknowledgement before stepping back. their role complete, the system now stable, corrected, aligned, the room remained still, not because it had to be, but because it understood, the tension that had once filled it replaced with something else, something quieter but stronger, clarity, and in that clarity, the final truth settled without resistance. Darius did not need to raise his voice, did not need to assert anything further, because the moment had already spoken for him, and as he turned slightly, preparing to move forward not away from the space but through it, he left behind something that could not be undone, not a confrontation, not a spectacle, but a correction, one that did not rely on volume or reaction, only on truth, fully revealed, fully understood, and impossible to ignore.